I've seen many dark nights in my years as a police officer. I thought I'd gotten used to the sound of gunfire echoing across American streets, the sight of blue lights flashing against brick walls, the bitter taste of blood in the air. But nothing could have prepared me for the morning I heard that Charlie Kirk had been shot. Charlie Kirk wasn't just another man in the crowd. He was a name, a face plastered on televisions across the country, a voice millions either followed or despised. To some, he was a fighter for conservative values. To others, he was a symbol of division. But no matter which side of the fence you stood on, one fact remained unshakable. When a high-profile figure like him goes down in a hail of bullets, the entire nation trembles. It was late August, the kind of humid southern morning where the air itself feels heavy with tension. Atlanta had been restless that summer. Political rallies, protests, debates, it all blended into one loud chorus of anger and ideology. People shouted past each other instead of listening. And in the middle of it all stood men like Charlie Kirk, amplifying voices, drawing crowds, and stirring emotions.
I remember sitting at my desk when the call came in. My radio crackled, sharp and sudden. Shots fired, possible high-profile target, immediate response requested. My pulse skipped. You learn to tell the difference between an ordinary call and one that will change the course of your career. This was the latter. The first reports were messy. Witnesses screaming over the line, sirens converging from every direction, social media exploding with shaky cell phone footage. All I knew was that Charlie Kirk had been attacked, and the suspect, a young man named Tyler Robinson, was already in custody. Too fast, I thought. Arrests don't usually come that quickly unless someone's caught in the act. That meant this was either a lucky break or something even darker. When I arrived at the scene, it felt like walking into the middle of a storm. The street was blocked off, yellow tape cutting through the humid air like a wound. Reporters had already gathered, their cameras pointed like vultures. Police cars lined the curb, their lights painting everything in stuttering shades of red and blue. And right there, in the center of it all, was the chaos that would dominate headlines for months. Charlie Kirk had been rushed to the hospital. The paramedics worked with grim efficiency, their gloves stained, their eyes focused. I caught only a glimpse, the pale face, the chest rising shallowly, the blood seeping through bandages. For all his fame, for all his larger-than-life presence, in that moment, he was just a man fighting to stay alive. The suspect was already in the back of a squad car, head bowed, wrists cuffed tight. Tyler Robinson, barely in his 20s. I looked at him, searching for signs of the monster the media would soon paint him as. What I saw instead was ordinary. A kid. Nervous, sweaty, his leg bouncing uncontrollably. He didn't look like a trained assassin or some hardened criminal. He looked like someone's neighbor, someone's son. And that was the part that chilled me most. Because evil doesn't always come with horns and fangs. Sometimes it wears the face of a boy who never grew past his anger. The evidence came fast, too fast. A handgun recovered at the scene, shell casings matching the weapon, eyewitnesses who swore they saw him raise the weapon and fire. It felt airtight, almost too airtight. I'd been a cop long enough to know that when things fall perfectly into place, you need to dig deeper, because real life is never that neat. But in those first hours, all that mattered was survival. Could Charlie Kirk pull through? Could the doctors stitch him back together? The hospital became the new command center. Reporters swarmed the entrance. Protesters gathered outside, some praying for his recovery, others shouting that he had brought this on himself. America, divided as ever, couldn't even unite in the face of blood. I stood in those hallways, listening to the beeping machines, watching the sweat bead on the surgeons' brows. And I thought about how fragile it all was. One trigger pull, one bullet. That's all it takes to tip a country further into chaos. Tyler Robinson was booked, charged, and transferred into holding before the sun even set. The DA wasted no time announcing they'd pursue the death penalty. That told me everything I needed to know about how big this case was going to be. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about politics, about sending a message, about shaping the narrative of an already fractured nation. As I left the hospital that night, exhausted and heavy, I knew this case wasn't going to leave me. Just like the others that haunted me from my career, this one would etch itself into my bones. Because this wasn't just a crime. This was a turning point. And it all began with the sound of gunfire echoing through an Atlanta street. I've seen suspects come and go. Some walk in with arrogance, some with fear, some with nothing at all behind their eyes. But when I first laid eyes on Tyler Robinson, I couldn't decide which category he belonged to. He wasn't the hardened criminal type. No tattoos sprawling across his neck, no scars that told a story of a violent past. He wasn't the smooth-talking manipulator either. No, Tyler was different. He looked like a boy who'd stumbled into a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. The booking officer handed me his file, and I flipped through the thin stack of papers. 23 years old. No serious priors, just a couple of misdemeanors, disorderly conduct, trespassing at a protest, nothing major. He had dropped out of college after 2 semesters. No steady job, estranged from his father, still lived with his mother in a small apartment on the east side of town. On paper, he was a nobody. But nobodies don't end up at the center of cases that shake the nation. I sat across from him in the interview room. The fluorescent lights buzzed above us, and the camera in the corner blinked red, recording every second. His hands were cuffed to the table, his knuckles white as he gripped the metal. I introduced myself, kept my tone steady, not aggressive. Sometimes you get more out of a suspect by giving them space than by pressing hard.
Tyler, I said, I'm here to hear your side. You understand what you've been accused of? He lifted his head slowly, eyes bloodshot, lips dry. He nodded, but the silence stretched on. Finally, in a shaky voice, he whispered, "They think I killed him." I leaned forward. "Did you?" His eyes darted toward the camera, then back at me. I don't know what they saw. I don't know what you all think you have, but it's not what happened." That was the first crack. He wasn't denying outright, but he wasn't confessing either. It sounded more like confusion or desperation.
Over the next few days, we dug deeper into Tyler's past. Friends described him as quiet, sometimes withdrawn, but passionate when it came to politics. Social media told an even louder story. His accounts were filled with retweets, comments, arguments. He had followed political figures from both sides, but his posts painted a picture of someone frustrated, angry, searching for belonging. He wasn't radicalized in the traditional sense. He wasn't part of a known extremist group. He was something scarier, a lone wolf, drifting between ideologies, stewing in resentment until it boiled over.
The weapon we recovered was registered to no one. Scratched off serial number, illegal. That was strike one against him. Ballistics matched the casings found at the scene, strike two. And eyewitnesses? They swore they saw him raise the gun, strike three. On the surface, it was an open and shut case. But here's what bothered me: timing. Tyler was picked up less than 10 minutes after the shots were fired. The officers said he was running down an alley nearby, out of breath, gun in hand. Too clean, too perfect, almost like someone wanted him to be found. When I pressed him again in interrogation, he broke down. Tears streamed down his face as he stammered, "I didn't do it. I swear to God I didn't pull the trigger. They set me up. You don't understand. I was there, but I didn't shoot him." "Then why were you running?" I asked. "Because I knew what it would look like. Because the gun was in my hand, and I don't even know how it got there." That was the moment my gut twisted. I'd heard plenty of lies in my career, but something about his voice, the raw panic, felt different. Maybe he was a brilliant manipulator. Maybe he was guilty as sin. Or maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. The DA didn't care. To them, Tyler Robinson was already convicted. They had motive, anger at Kirk's politics. They had means, the gun. They had opportunity, being at the scene. In their eyes, that was enough. And the public, they were split down the middle. Half the country wanted his head on a platter. The other half claimed it was a government setup to silence dissent.
In cases like this, truth becomes the first casualty. All that matters is the narrative. But for me, standing in that interrogation room, looking into Tyler Robinson's hollow eyes, I couldn't shake the question: was he the shooter? Or just a convenient scapegoat? And if he didn't pull the trigger, then who did?
Investigations are never as clean as people think. On TV, you see detectives lifting a single fingerprint and catching the killer before the commercial break. In reality, it's a grind, a slow, grueling battle against missing pieces, bad leads, and pressure from every direction. This case was no different. The crime scene itself was chaos. A political rally turned into a battlefield in a matter of seconds. Hundreds of people screaming, running, trampling over evidence before we even got there. Blood on the pavement, cell phones recording from every angle, news helicopters circling overhead. If you wanted confusion, you couldn't have scripted it better. We locked down the area as best we could, but every second that passed, evidence was being lost. I remember kneeling near a pool of blood, marking shell casings, while a reporter's drone buzzed just 10 feet away. That's the reality now. Investigators racing against not just time, but against the 24-hour news cycle. The weapon was recovered, a Glock 19, serial number filed down. Ballistics matched the spent shells. On paper, that tied directly to Tyler Robinson. But when I looked closer,
The chain of custody raised eyebrows. The officer who bagged the weapon admitted it was recovered not from Tyler's hands, but from a few feet away in the alley. Tyler was running, yes, but the gun? It was lying near a dumpster, already smeared with fingerprints from multiple people. That didn't sit right with me. Then came the eyewitnesses. Eyewitness testimony is shaky at best, but in a case like this, it becomes gold. Half a dozen people swore they saw Tyler raise the gun, but when pressed, their stories wobbled. One woman claimed she saw him in a blue hoodie. He was wearing gray. Another man said he heard him shout something political before firing, but the crowd noise was so deafening it seemed impossible. Another witness admitted they only saw a guy with dark hair. That could have been a dozen different men in that crowd. Video evidence was our next step. Dozens of shaky phone clips surfaced online within hours. Some showed the moment shots were fired, blurry frames, chaotic movement. One angle did show a figure resembling Tyler near the front line, but the footage cut off right as the gunshots rang out. Another clip showed him running afterward, clutching something. But whether it was a gun or just a phone, well, that depended on how much you wanted to believe.
As we dug deeper, we checked surveillance cameras from nearby businesses. That's when things got strange. One camera showed a man in a cap moving quickly through the crowd just before the shots. His build didn't quite match Tyler's. Broader shoulders, shorter height. He vanished into the chaos seconds later. When I tried to follow up on that lead, I was told to focus on the main suspect. Orders from higher up. That was my first clue that maybe the story they wanted wasn't the story the evidence told. We traced the gun's origin. Illegal firearm, sure, but tracing back through the black market is like chasing smoke. Still, one informant swore the weapon had changed hands multiple times in the weeks leading up to the rally. Tyler's name never came up in that chain, not once. That left me asking, how did it end up in his hands or near him at the exact moment Kirk was gunned down? Forensics gave us another twist. Gunshot residue tests on Tyler came back inconclusive. Trace amounts on his sleeve, but none on his hands. If he had pulled the trigger, residue should have been clear as day. The lab chalked it up to environmental transfer, meaning he could have picked it up just by brushing against someone who had fired. That wasn't proof. That was a red flag. Despite the inconsistencies, the case was moving full steam toward prosecution. The DA wanted a conviction, the mayor wanted a headline, and the media wanted a villain. Tyler Robinson fit the role too well. Young, angry, politically frustrated, a face the public could attach their outrage to. But behind the scenes, I kept asking questions. Why did witnesses conflict? Why did the video evidence cut off at critical moments? Why was I being told to ignore leads that didn't align with the narrative? The deeper I dug, the more I realized this case wasn't about justice. It was about control. About calming the storm that had swept across the nation after the shooting of a political figure like Charlie Kirk. Someone had to take the fall, and Tyler Robinson was the chosen sacrifice. I've worked long enough to know when a case smells wrong, and this one stank from the very beginning. Courtrooms have their own kind of gravity. The moment you step inside, it's as if the air grows heavier, the silence sharper. Everyone knows the stakes. In this case, the stakes couldn't have been higher. A political figure had been gunned down in broad daylight, and Tyler Robinson was about to face the full weight of the system. From the very first day of trial, the prosecution made their intentions clear. They wanted the death penalty. No plea bargains, no second chances. In their opening statement, the district attorney painted Tyler as a radical, a ticking time bomb who finally went off. They showed the jury clips of the chaos, replayed the screams, and froze the frame on Tyler running through the alley. They didn't need to prove every detail. They just needed to plant fear and certainty in the minds of 12 citizens. The defense, on the other hand, faced an uphill battle. Tyler's public defender was competent but outmatched. The state had resources, political backing, and media on their side. The defense had contradictions, shadows of doubt, and a young man insisting he hadn't pulled the trigger. Witnesses took the stand one by one. The woman who swore she saw a blue hoodie pointed at Tyler, even though photos from that day showed him in gray. The man who claimed Tyler shouted something before firing doubled down, though the audio evidence from multiple recordings captured nothing but noise. Each time the defense poked holes, the prosecution redirected, reminding the jury of the weapon, the running, the motive. Then came the forensics expert. Under oath, he admitted the gunshot residue test on Tyler's hands was negative. But instead of letting that hang in the air, the prosecution reframed it. Residue can be wiped away. Gloves can be used. A lack of residue doesn't mean he didn't fire. That's how trials work. Facts twisted into tools, doubt turned into certainty with just the right spin. The video evidence played like a highlight reel, clips edited together to create a narrative. Tyler near the stage, Tyler in the crowd, Tyler fleeing after the shots. The jury didn't see hours of chaotic footage, just the curated moments that built a picture. And when the defense objected, the judge overruled. I sat in the back watching, my stomach churning. I'd been in law enforcement long enough to know trials aren't always about truth. They're about performance. And the prosecution was performing brilliantly.
When Tyler took the stand in his own defense, it was his last chance. His voice cracked as he swore he didn't shoot, that he was caught in the chaos, that the gun wasn't his. He described being shoved, panicked, running without knowing what he was running from. Some jurors looked at him with pity, others with skepticism. But the DA's cross-examination cut him down. If you were innocent, why run? Over and over, that one question, and Tyler had no answer that satisfied them. The trial dragged on for weeks, but the momentum never shifted. The media outside camped every day, cameras flashing, headlines screaming, "Justice for Kirk! Shooter faces death penalty!" The nation was watching, and the jury knew it. Finally, the closing arguments sealed it. The prosecution spoke of safety, of sending a message,
of how no one should be allowed to strike at democracy and live. The defense spoke of reasonable doubt, of contradictions in testimony, of a broken system rushing to judgment. When the jury filed back in after deliberation, the room was silent. Tyler sat hunched, hands clasped, eyes red. The foreman stood, unfolded the paper, and read the words that would echo in my mind for years. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing was swift, the death penalty. Tyler's mother wept so loudly the judge had to call for order. Tyler just stared blankly ahead, as if the weight of it hadn't sunk in yet. I should have felt closure. The city did. The mayor gave a speech about justice served. The news anchors declared the case a triumph of law and order. People cheered outside the courthouse. But me? I felt hollow, because deep down, I knew the evidence had cracks wide enough to swallow a man whole. And in that moment, watching Tyler Robinson led away in chains, I couldn't shake the question that haunted me. Did we just condemn an innocent man to die to protect the illusion of justice?
If the courtroom was a battlefield of words, the streets outside became a war zone of belief. The day after Tyler Robinson's sentencing, protests erupted across the country. Some carried signs that read, "Justice for Kirk," faces red with anger, demanding swift execution. Others marched with banners declaring, "Free Tyler," insisting the trial was a sham, a scapegoat served on a silver platter to calm the nation. I watched from a distance, leaning against my patrol car, the chants rising like thunder. On one side of the barricades, men and women wrapped in flags screamed for vengeance. On the other, students, activists, and skeptics shouted for truth. In the middle stood us, the police, holding the line, trying to keep the two Americas from tearing each other apart. The media only poured gasoline on the fire. Cable networks split down the middle. One channel showed endless loops of Kirk's speeches, calling him a patriot struck down in his prime. Another aired shaky cell phone clips of the trial, overlaid with captions about reasonable doubt and government cover-up. Social media was even worse. Hashtags trending by the hour, misinformation spreading faster than facts, families divided at the dinner table. Politicians seized the moment. Some stood on podiums declaring Tyler Robinson the face of domestic terrorism, promising stricter laws, harsher penalties, more control. Others accused the state of railroading a young man to score political points. It wasn't about Tyler anymore. It wasn't even about Charlie Kirk. It was about power. About who could control the story, bend it to their will, and turn public grief into votes. I remember one night driving through downtown, seeing murals spray painted on brick walls. On one block, Charlie Kirk's face with a halo. On the next, Tyler Robinson's face with the word innocent scrawled beneath. Two martyrs, depending on which side of the street you stood. For the families caught in the between, there was no comfort. Kirk's supporters mourned him as a fallen soldier of ideology. Tyler's mother sat in silence on national television, clutching her son's photo, begging for mercy, both grieving, both unheard. And me? I was drowning in the noise. The evidence I'd seen, the contradictions I couldn't ignore, they haunted me. But when I raised concerns with colleagues, they brushed me off. The case is closed. Don't stir the pot. My superiors warned me to keep my doubts to myself. We did our job, leave it at that. But justice isn't about closing a case. It's about truth, and truth felt further away than ever. The protests grew violent in some cities. Clashes with police, broken windows, fires burning in the night. I stood in riot gear more than once, facing a sea of angry faces, half shouting that we were heroes, half screaming that we were corrupt. I wanted to shout back, to tell them I wasn't sure anymore which side was right, that maybe both were wrong, that maybe the truth was lost somewhere in the middle, buried under politics and fear. The nation was divided, but there was one thing both sides agreed on. Nothing would ever be the same again. And as I lay in bed at night, sirens wailing in the distance, I asked myself a question I couldn't answer. Was Tyler Robinson truly guilty, or had we sacrificed him on the altar of public opinion?
There are nights I can't close my eyes without seeing Tyler Robinson's face. Not the mugshot that was plastered across every news channel, but the face he wore in the interrogation room. Pale, hollow, desperate. I've sat across from killers before, men who admitted their crimes without blinking. Tyler wasn't one of them. Since the trial, I've replayed every detail in my mind like a broken tape. The way the gun was found near him, not on him. The conflicting witness statements. The surveillance footage of that other figure in the crowd. The one I was told to ignore. Each piece gnaws at me like a splinter under the skin. And no matter how much the world insists the case is over, my gut won't let it rest. I lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if we condemned the wrong man. I see Kirk's supporters celebrating justice. I see Tyler's mother broken on national TV. And I see myself, caught in the middle, too afraid to speak out, too bound by the badge to admit I might have helped bury the truth. Being a cop teaches you to live with doubt. Cases close with unanswered questions all the time. But this feels different. This feels like we didn't just miss the truth. We buried it. And in burying it, we buried a man alive. I think about the oath I took when I joined the force, to protect, to serve, to uphold justice. But what does that oath mean when justice is a performance, when the scales are tipped by politics, when the outcome is decided before the evidence is even weighed? Some nights, I walk past the box in my closet, a plain cardboard box filled with copies of reports, photos, scraps of notes I shouldn't have kept, evidence that didn't fit the narrative. I tell myself I keep it because I can't let go. But the truth is, I keep it because I'm not ready to give up on Tyler. Not yet. Guilt is a heavy thing. It seeps into every part of your life. I've pushed friends away. I've stopped answering calls. My colleagues think I've moved on, but inside I'm rotting. Every siren I hear, every protest chant in the distance, every flash of Kirk's face on TV is a reminder that I failed. Failed Kirk, failed Tyler, failed justice.
I wonder sometimes what would happen if I spoke out. If I stood on a podium and told the world what I saw, what I knew didn't add up. But then I think of the consequences. My badge stripped, my pension gone, my family dragged through the mud. And worse, what if I'm wrong? What if Tyler really did it, and all I've done is create more chaos in a country already tearing itself apart? That's the hardest part, not knowing, living in the gray. When I joined the force, I believed in good and evil, right and wrong, guilty and innocent. But this case has shown me the world doesn't work that way. People aren't just heroes or villains. Sometimes they're victims of circumstance, pawns in a game bigger than themselves. And sometimes the people who are supposed to protect the truth are the very ones who bury it. I'm haunted not just by the possibility that Tyler is innocent, but by the certainty I'll never know for sure. And that's a kind of punishment no courtroom could ever hand down.
People think closure is a destination. They think once the verdict is read, once the sentence is handed down, everything wraps up neatly, tied with a bow. But in my experience, closure isn't real. It's a story we tell ourselves to sleep at night. Charlie Kirk is still gone. Tyler Robinson is still sitting in a concrete cell, waiting for the state to decide the day he dies. And me? I'm left holding the weight of questions no verdict can erase. I drive past the rally site sometimes, the place where it all began. The stage is gone now, the banners taken down, the blood scrubbed from the pavement. People walk past, shopping bags in hand, not knowing, not remembering. But I remember. I hear the gunshots in my mind, the screams, the chaos. That ground is scarred, whether the city wants to admit it or not. I also think about the victims we don't name, the ones beyond Kirk and Tyler, the people in the crowd who'll never feel safe in a public square again, the officers who still wake up sweating from nightmares of that day, Tyler's mother, who lost her son to a system she no longer trusts, Kirk's family robbed of a father, a husband, a brother. Every case leaves behind ripples, and these ripples will outlive us all. So, what do we call justice? Is it punishing someone, anyone, to quiet the storm? Or is it digging until your hands bleed, refusing to rest until the truth, no matter how ugly, finally comes out? If it's the first, then yes, justice was served. But if it's the second, then we failed. I think about Tyler's last words in the courtroom before they led him away. He turned to the jury, voice shaking, but steady enough to cut through the silence. If I die, I'll die innocent, and someday the truth will find you. That line haunts me, because whether he's guilty or not, he believed it. And that kind of belief doesn't come easy.
Maybe someday new evidence will surface. Maybe someone will confess. Maybe a dusty file in some forgotten archive will shed light on the truth. Or maybe not. Maybe the truth died the same day Kirk did. But I know this: I can't let myself forget, because forgetting is how injustice survives. Forgetting is how we repeat the same mistakes over and over until the system breaks for good. So, I keep the box in my closet. I keep the doubts in my chest. I keep the story alive, even if only in whispers, because silence would be the final nail in the coffin of truth. Closure? No. There's no closure here. There's only the lesson carved into my bones. Justice and truth are not the same thing. Justice is what the system delivers. Truth is what it buries. And in the quiet hours of the night, when the city sleeps and the streets fall silent, I sit with that lesson. It's heavy. It's bitter. But it's real. And it's mine to carry until the day I die.
People ask me sometimes, why do you still talk about this case? Why not move on? And I never know how to answer. Maybe because moving on feels like betrayal. Maybe because the moment we stop telling the story, the moment we stop asking the hard questions, that's when the truth dies for good. I didn't join the force for glory. I didn't put on this badge thinking I'd be the hero in anyone's story. I joined because I believed in something simple, that my job was to protect, to uncover, to serve the truth. But this case taught me something I'll never forget. Sometimes the truth doesn't win. Sometimes the system buries it, dresses it up in verdicts and headlines, and calls it justice. But when I close my eyes at night, I don't see justice. I see Kirk collapsing on that pavement. I hear the gunshots echoing off concrete walls. I see Tyler's eyes, full of a kind of hopeless conviction as he swore he was innocent. And I feel the weight of all the voices we'll never hear again. Maybe you'll believe the official story. Maybe you'll believe mine. Or maybe, like me, you'll be trapped in the space between, where nothing feels certain and everything feels broken. That's the place I live now, a place where closure doesn't exist. I know one thing, though. If you're listening to this, if you've followed me through every detail, every crack in the timeline, every doubt I've laid bare, then you're part of the story now too. And that matters. Because as long as someone remembers, as long as someone refuses to let silence win, the truth isn't gone. It's just waiting. Waiting for the day someone digs it up. Waiting for the courage to speak. Waiting for justice and truth to finally meet in the same place. Until then, I carry it. I carry it for Kirk, for Tyler, for every victim, named and unnamed. And maybe, just maybe, I carry it for you too. Because the truth has weight, and someone has to hold it.